Okay, hey everybody, it's Gib the Nutritionist here, and today's going to be a fun video. And I did this a little clickbaity to get attention, but when you really look into it and how I describe it and how I talk about it, it's not super clickbaity. But it's important that some people need to know, right? Do you have a mutation that actually affects your genetics? Do you have a specific mutation that not only affects your genetics, but one that makes you a warrior type, right, as they call it, or the other one that makes you a warrior? I'm going to do the warrior next week. But today I want to focus on people that are warrior-like. They're cool, they're calm, they're collected, and it's seen very well regarded. But what I do think is some people can mistake this as, being depressed. And maybe to an extent this does influence depression, as it could be kind of similar. But we're going to talk about how you have a much more faster catechol-o-methyltransferase processing of your dopamine, your epinephrine, norepinephrine, estrogen, because this does, in a sort of way, it changes your archetype of a person, right? So if you have that mutation, as opposed to having the other mutation, as opposed to being normal, right, where you're in the middle, right, you're going to be calm or less full of anxiety. On the flip side, you're no more anxiety, less calm, right? But, I'm just yapping away. Let me get started. So, okay, are you depressed for no specific reason? Even to every psychiatrist, mental health counselor, therapist, and specialist, but nothing is better. You're taking the prescribed medications but have not improved in any way that's reasonable, fit for living a human life. Everyone has their opinion on these medications. A lot of people that have been on them and experienced them, the grand majority say, yeah, not for me. A lot of them, it does work, right? Because everyone's different and a lot of factors matter. But, I care about the most part. And what if one reason people struggle with depression isn't simply that they don't make enough dopamine, but rather they break it down way too quick? And this is where we're talking about this valine/valine mutation, right? This wild type, in which people process it too quickly. So this is where this gene becomes interesting, COMT, because people may feel not just depressed, right? But the big thing is unstimulated, unmotivated, in a sort of slackerish way, but, they're not lazy. I mean, they'll do things. You probably not be put in the right direction, they'll do things, right? But I don't really believe that they're mostly depressed or that the lack of stimulation is what's causing them to be, depressed, right? And again, I'm not accounting for people that have been through abuse, right? That's important to note. But if you have been through abuse, this makes it even more harder, in that it's more likely to affect you, right? I'm just patching holes so people can understand. Okay, there are two differences in phenotypes based on genetics. So COMT stands for catechol-o-methyltransferase. It's an enzyme responsible for metabolizing catecholamines such as dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and participates in the metabolism of catecholamines. The most studied one is going to be RS4680, known as a Val-158-Met, which is methionine. So for understanding depression, we're going to look at genetic COMT form of Val/Val. This is the genotype that produces the faster activity form of COMT. This means a person with a genetic type will automatically be higher in their COMT activity, which causes much faster catecholamine breakdown than normal. Now, again, doesn't mean everybody with this mutation is going to be depressed, right? But what it does mean, right, is it creates a different environment in your body in which you need to actually work for balancing your dopamine, your norepinephrine, the signaling of your prefrontal cortex in regards to your mental health. And we're going to get into that, and I'm going to describe that and talk about nutrients that are missing, right? Because, again, right, nutrients are everything. Without nutrients, how is your body going to run? There's all these biochemical pathways in the body, right? If you take one out, right, you take a few of them out, right? That's like dominoes falling, except in this case, you're removing dominoes, so you throw down the other domino, it's going to do a clean smack on nothing, and the rest of the dominoes are still, upright, and they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it's important to know your COMT genetic type. So again, 50% of people are normal, more or less. About a quarter, more or less, they're going to be, a fast type. Another of the quarter is going to be more or less, the slow type, which is more anxiety. But again, we're focusing on the warrior today. The people that are too chill, too relaxed. So here you have dopamine, right? Get the receptors that are connecting. And then you have the metabolite, which means it's working out the dopamine a lot faster to be broken down. Whereas opposed to the people on the flip side, the extreme, right? They have a lot less of the metabolites and a lot more of the dopamine. Which in their case, too much dopamine can cause, anxiety. In the other case, where you have not too much dopamine, you can have way less anxiety. In a sense, less stimulation, right? So the RS4680 variant changes the amino acid in the COMT enzyme, in which it's supposed to be normally valine and methionine, but when you have double val, then you have more enzyme activity. So this is why people that are val-val, they're going to be depressed, unmotivated, have apathy, calm, considered the genotype wild. And you have valine methionine, this is the normal, this is, balanced, Then you have methionine. This is the lowest activity of that enzyme, so they're going to be more anxiety, more hyper, a little more restless, that worrisome kind of behavior, considered the homozygous mutated genotype. And the difference can be substantial because, different enzyme activity determines more or less how much dopamine is in your brain, especially the metabolism of your dopamine. And if you're that kind of person, and by the time I'm done with this article, right, and you listen to what I say, you read what I say, you consider it, maybe you'll say, right, maybe I'm a warrior, right? Or maybe you're thinking, oh, I'm none of these things, I'm probably, warrior. In terms of worried a lot, anxiety, right? Or you might think, I'm a little bit of both, right? So I'm in the middle, right? I'm normal. But again, right, I'm against people self-diagnosing. So I recommend testing for it, right? So you do know for a fact that you have this issue. Because if you test for it and you don't have val/val or methionine, and you're in the normal, right? You're valine/methionine, then what I give you here is going to help you with your dopamine. Because the whole point is to fix dopamine metabolism by restoring the nutrients you need to get it going again, right? People often don't understand that. So I like people to know that you're not screwed, you're not fucked, but rather, whether you have it or not, this information is going to help you. Because again, regardless, you do need your vitamins, you do need your minerals, you do need your amino acids, you need all that kind of stuff, and we're going to talk about that. So again, you go do testing for it. I recommend people do it with their doctors. So you go to LabCorp or your, whichever testing facility is near you. You get the test done, and they'll let you know. There are at-home tests. I haven't looked into them. I don't know anything about them really. I just do know they exist, and they do seem kind of pricey. But I'm assuming if you got, you got a job, you're working, you got insurance, you go to your doctor, you kind of talk about this, then they'll be cool and they'll give you a referral to go get that blood work done, or however they do it, right? Because it's either a blood work or saliva/cheek swab. So I guess it depends, but you'll find the answer. So why Fast catechol-o-methyltransferase may matter for depression? So to understand the mental health implications of a faster COMT, we've got to understand what this actually does. So for the most part, people look at it as the pleasure chemical in your brain, right? It helps you for motivation, helps you for rewards. It kind of gets you into the sense of goal direction. So when you accomplish your goal, you feel good. Learning, you attach a kind of, a goal, the motivation, reward, anticipation into your learning. So you learn things that you're into, right? And I make a big point, right? People go to school, right? Let's say high school, right? You got people that took math. They fucking hate math. They suck at it, right? Maybe you're not meant to do math, right? Like, that's just reality, right? So you sure as hell shouldn't do calculus or, advanced things, right? Maybe you're more into history or reading or science, right? That doesn't require math. Or maybe you love math, right? So you should be like an engineer or a rocket scientist or a physicist or something, right? And this is where I talk to people, about noise versus data. When you like things and you care about them, it's data. You use it and you make sense of it. If you don't care about something, it's just noise, right? Let's say you're a mechanic, you're into cars, right? And engines and all that kind of stuff, right? If someone talks about decoding cancer, you're like, not my thing. It's just noise. I'm into what's the fastest engine that could, go as fast as possible and can save you a lot of money on gas and can be the future. Like I'm just saying, right? Whatever you're interested in, that's what you care about. That's not to say you shouldn't care about other things, right? But you're less likely to care about things to such a point where it does affect your dopamine and your rewards and what matters to you, and that's what makes it unique, right? Because everybody cares about football, right? For example, me, I don't care about football. If there was no football tomorrow, it wouldn't impact me at all because I don't care, right? I'm not a sports kind of guy, right? But for some people, they're into that kind of stuff, right? So the point I want to make, right, is we're all different, and that makes us unique. So even though someone has an interest you don't like, it's still important to them, right? And I think that's pretty cool, right? Some people love history and they know a lot of things about history, and other people too feel that way. Other people they don't give a fuck. They don't see the importance of how history can be cyclical and how things happen in past history that are happening again in today's world, right? Regardless, that's just noise to them. But to other people, it's valuable data, and there needs that data of history, understanding it, so we're not doomed to repeat the past, right? So what I'm saying, right, is if you're the warrior type, right, the fast type, I would suggest just really focus on things you like. Because if you do things you don't like, then you're not going to be happy, and you're definitely not going to stimulate that dopamine hit, right? We all need dopamine, right? When you need too much of it, it becomes addiction, right? So that's why I always tell people, find things you enjoy. That way, you're more or less kind of happy. So getting back into it, right? It affects your working memory, cognitive flexibility, your salience, your movement, your emotional regulation. Therefore, I mean, you still have pleasure, right? That's the point. But you could have an impairment in your motivation and goal-directed behavior, because what makes this kind of relevant is your pleasure is not long-lasting compared to a person that's normal, right? Because you get rid of it quicker. So consider the difference between these two things. I don't enjoy anything, one, and two, I want to do things, but I can't seem to make myself start anything right. Now, they're not the same problem, right? But the pattern can be involved in dysfunction and your dopamine's motivation and the executive circuits, right? Executive meaning you're going to act on it and do it. So if you're going to do something you don't like it, don't do it. If you like something, you want to do it, then do it. That's usually what I tell people. But for people with, the fast type, right? They don't have, in some cases, longer-lasting dopamine or enough dopamine in which they pull the trigger on doing things. So if you know you're that type, get a friend, a family member, of course, someone that's smart and, they care about you, and have them push you in the right direction, right? Or if you have an amazing wife or husband, right? That's important, right? If you just take a little shove and they'll do amazing things, and they'll get things going. So again, COMT breaks down catecholamines. This is going to be dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine, also your estrogens. You get tyrosine, which is an important amino acid, so eat your meat. You get conversions into dopamine. Then it goes into exocytosis right here. And it goes here. Then you have this dot here, right? It goes into here. You have the neurons acting on that. And essentially, while that's happening, right? Because you are the fast type, the wild type, it goes quicker. So fast COMT can reduce dopamine availability in the prefrontal cortex. This part of your brain is really important for your planning, your concentration, your working memory, decision making, motivation, emotional regulation, and goal-directed behavior. Unlike other parts of the brain, the prefrontal cortex has a limited amount of dopamine clearance. So COMT plays a role, and because you have a higher activity, increases dopamine metabolism. So does it mean you make more? It means you get rid of it quicker. So in a nutshell, You got dopamine, then it goes through COMT, then it's the methylated dopamine metabolites, which are, becomes inactivated. So if you have a higher COMT activity, you have faster dopamine metabolism, which depletes the amount of dopamine you have available, and you have less of that pleasure, that kind of, you know, enjoyment of something, right? I think an important thing to notice, right, is people that they're hitting goals, they're doing milestones, and you're kind of like, whatever. It's more likely going to be a person who is a wild type, a fast COMT kind of person. So this is one proposed mechanism through which the valine allele could influence cognitive and emotional phenotypes. But again, there's always nuance to address, right? Having low dopamine is not automatically better or worse. Some people have low dopamine, and they're fine. Some people have low dopamine, and they're not fine. Some people have high dopamine, they're fine. Some people have low dopamine, they're not fine. It varies, right? Because although this is a very impactful, important part of, you and how it affects you, you have other hormones in your body that influences you, right? You got good days, you got bad days, right? You have good diets, you got bad diets. You get environmental factors, internal factors, external factors, things that affect you, right? So this whole thing is going to be talking about what you can do to affect your epigenetics to get a little more dopamine, which means you can have a lot more lasting joy, right? And most importantly, to know thyself, right? Because if you know you're this type, then you understand yourself and you could, push yourself in the right direction. And when you do that, you make better decisions and you could do things you didn't know you could have done. And I think that's, important for a lot of people, right? Especially in this world today where, you know, you got to really care for yourself and others around you. And if you're not making that push for yourself, then you must be really lucky to have someone do that push for you. If not, then, things won't happen. You gotta pull the trigger to make things happen, right? So the prefrontal cortex works in a sort of inverted U relationship. So again, too little dopamine, it'll mess with your cognition. Too much dopamine, it also messes with your cognition, right? This is why we're talking about the slow type and the fast type, because the fast type doesn't have enough, and don't have that much anxiety. But the fast type won't have much anxiety because they're getting rid of dopamine too quick. But the slow type, they build up dopamine way too much and they can't get rid of it quickly, you know? So what happens is they get anxiety and different symptoms and restlessness, and that affects them. That's why they're called the type that worries a lot, as opposed to the warrior type. So here, clears dopamine, estrogen, adrenaline quickly. That's what they're called under pressure. Now, these people here are slow, right? Methionine. Leaves dopamine, estrogen, adrenaline around longer. And depending on certain health factors, which we'll talk about more likely next week, you'll understand maybe if you're that kind of person, right? Or if you know people around you that are that way. Because if you know people that are, have that anxiety, that worry, you could learn that, it's your COMT, work on it, fix it, and make them a little more chiller, right? That's the goal. So dopamine and symptoms of depression. So dopamine signaling becomes insufficient and circuits involved in motivation and executive function. A person may experience low motivation, difficulty beginning the task, reduced drive, mental fatigue, poor concentration, reduced reward sensitivity, difficulty pursuing goals, brain fog, procrastination, and reduced interest in previously meaningful activities, right? Now, this doesn't mean someone with a fast COMT or that they have depression, right? But theoretically, COMT can be one of the variables influencing how efficiently someone maintains catecholamine signaling, aka their dopamine. So in my opinion, a person with depression, they can't laugh at jokes or funny movies, especially jokes that would have made them burst out laughing, like really funny, right? Everyone has specific comedians they like. Some people like Gabriel Iglesias, right? Some people like Louis C.K., some people like Dave Chappelle, some people like Schultz, some people like Shane Gillis. You got Mark Norman, I like him a lot. And there's different styles of comedy, right? So if you find someone you like a lot and make you laugh, and it just stops one day and, not even a little chuckle or a little then to me, in my opinion, that's depression, right? Because that should give you some kind of joy. And that's the thing, right? If you can still chuckle and laugh, then, in my opinion, I'll think you're depressed. I mean, we're all dealing with shit, right? It's just life. But I wouldn't make a mountain out of a molehill. You know what I'm saying? We all struggle, right? It's just the human condition. Because without struggle, life is boring. Why do you watch dramas? Because it's interesting, there's a problem and it needs to be solved, right? Life is a struggle, and there's beauty in that, and I hope people can see that. But, like, if you're, like, just completely distraught and you're just defeated and, like, then, yeah, that could be very well depression, right? We'll talk about that later, and other criteria are used to diagnose that. Because, again, right, I don't believe people should diagnose it. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not diagnosing anything. But, just to be mindful and to kind of more or less joggle your brain and to get things going and to understand, okay, maybe I'm not depressed, maybe I'm lucky, maybe I do have things that make me appreciate my life and who I am, and you smile at it, right? I mean, if you got everything, you're not happy, then, that could be an issue. So, someone with a fast COMT can have similar symptoms of depression. They still laugh at jokes and enjoy things, but it's short-lived, and that's what I think people should really understand, right? Instead of, like, feeling really proud of, like, graduating college, right? They're just like, yeah, all right. Whereas another person's gonna throw a big ass party and, drink a lot and, just really go wild. That's just the spectrum of, how people are, right? Someone could, I don't know, invent 0 point energy and they'd be like, yeah, cool. I mean, everyone has free energy and, you gotta pay for money anymore and there's less, hydrocarbons causing pollution in the world and, things will get cheaper. Yay. Whereas another person would be like, oh my god, this is amazing. I solved energy, no one's gonna starve anymore. We could do all the things we gotta do. No need for nuclear power. No need for gasoline. The world's gonna be an amazing place, right? Like, depending on how people talk, how they speak, who they're with, more or less about how their phenotype is expressed by either the fast type, they're chill, cool guys, or the person with the methionine, right? The homozygous mutation, and they're just a little more ecstatic, but also worried, right? So COMT doesn't only break down dopamine, it also metabolizes norepinephrine and epinephrine. This is important for being alert, having attention, being aroused, energy, and stress responsiveness, right? To anything in your environment. So higher COMT activity can influence the metabolism of several catecholamines. That means a person with higher COMT activity may have dopamine and norepinephrine clearance faster. This becomes especially important during chronic stress as they may not feel it hit them as hard as other people, right? So with a person with this COMT, they can take on a lot of shit before they realize I'm actually tired. And these are people that work way too hard, and they don't really see that they're working too hard, and it's like, dude, you're like your health is failing, like your relationships are going sour, you're not eating enough. Like, they can take a lot of hits before they understand that they're going in a bad direction, right? Or that they're doing way too much, right? They could be workaholics in that regard, right? Because they may derive pleasure from working. But again, everyone's different. Some people are very much like that if they like what they do. If they don't like what they do, then they're not really much like that, right? That depends, right? Everything matters. Everything is a variable to consider. So people with COMT mutation are considered the warrior type. They're pretty calm, right? When it comes to danger, they're cool under pressure. They tend to seek out activities which stimulate their dopamine, like skydiving, racing, getting on roller coasters. They need something to kick up their adrenaline, right? Because their adrenaline is, like I said, it's short-lived, more or less, because it clears out pretty quick. So, like I say, right, they're kind of chasing the dragon, right? Kind of like how a person does drugs, and once your body's used to the drugs, you gotta do more drugs to get that feeling again. So for these people, right, some of them can become adrenaline junkies, just trying to get that feeling of dopamine, right? Because, I mean, it just depends, right? What do you care about and what what really makes you feel warm, happy, and special inside, right? And that's something to be considered. They look for adventure because they're trying to chase a dragon. Worst case scenario, they do drugs to stimulate them, like caffeine, crack, or meth. And compared to a calmer drug like weed or heroin, they don't prefer that. They want to feel active, they want to feel stimulated. Whereas a person that's a warrior, right? Like, a slow COMT, they tend to take drugs like weed or heroin or what do you call it? Opium, right? To kind of chill and relax because they're always so worked up and they got anxiety and they can't stop thinking and they're restless and they got way too much dopamine going on. So you know, understanding a person's choice of drug can or may more likely indicate, you know, are you getting the dopamine hit you need, or are you just, you know, you get too much going on and you have the anxiety, right? So I just find it interesting how there's a preference right there. Now, doesn't mean a person that's a warrior type, right? A fast COMT doesn't mean they never get anxiety. Maybe you talk to a new chick and like her a lot, want to mess things up, right? I mean, you'll get anxiety, of course, right? New job, new coworkers, you want to make it a good first impression, right? I mean, there are times where they do get anxiety, right? Like meaningful anxiety, not like random anxiety out of nowhere, right? There are people too, right? It's not like they're so cool and badass 24/7 that they just don't care, right? Again, right, getting chased by a serial killer in a mask. I mean, you're gonna run away. You're not just gonna be like, whatever. You're gonna be like, fuck that. This guy has a knife. He's gonna kill me. This guy's crazy. I think they caught that guy. He had like a mask. It looked like a mask from the movie. Was it the Hills Run Red? And the guy was like chasing people with a knife and asking them to want to die. Was it in Georgia or something? I think the U.S. Marshals caught the guy. He was trying to make videos for like social media. Again, go viral. Dumb shit like that. It's terrible, but it's kind of funny because it's like, wow, actually caught a guy in a mask doing it for the Vine, right? Or World Star because the guy was black. But anyway, point being, right? If you're in a situation and you're this warrior type and you know bullets are coming at you, I mean, you will freak out for a bit, and eventually, if you're like a seasoned soldier, then you're kind of like, yeah, whatever, enjoy the firefight. So it really depends, right? We're all different people, and the fact that genetics does play a role in how we are and how we feel and why we are the way we are, it's really important. It should be looked upon, right? Because we tend to think we're all humans, right? But humans are determined by their environment, how they're raised, and their genetics, right? But not just genetics, but if you have the ability to have the epigenetic input to change your genetics and how they're influenced and expressed, right? Then hey, it's more power to you, and that's the whole point of why I'm writing this article because it's pretty cool to have power in your own hands. That's the beauty of knowledge. Now, I will say, right, if you start to get anxiety and like you've never had it before, but it hits you out of nowhere, right? Like you've always been cool, calm, and it just hits you. It could be copper overload because I have seen that in clients. It could be moldy exposure to mycotoxins or CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome, sick building syndrome, however people want to call that. You're exposed to black mold or green mold or yellow mold or hidden behind a wall, there's a pipe leak, and the vents, the HVAC, something, right? Maybe you had a car filter that wasn't changed in 10 years, right? Blowing that crap in your face, you notice you get allergies because of that. So if it comes out of nowhere, then yeah, I would say look into that, right? And I got some articles on the mold stuff. So yeah, sometimes we're like, I feel alive when I'm doing skydiving, right? As opposed to other things. So yeah, I mean, they're not exactly daredevils, but they like the rush, the feeling, right? Kind of why some people love horror movies and they love watching them and they get a kick out of them. And how some people just hate watching scary movies because it really scares them, and they, like little factors here and there, right? Like that just influences how we are. I just think it's so neat, right? Like we're all different, but in some cases we're kind of the same in some ways. and different. Fast COMT and the stress response, and a sort of personality type. So stress changes catecholamine physiology. When the brain perceives threat or a challenge, sympathetic activation increases norepinephrine, epinephrine, and again, catecholamine related signaling. They help us wake up, be focused, react quickly, mobilize energy, and respond to danger. The problem occurs when stress becomes chronic, like you have it all the time. Repeated stress can continually challenge the systems responsible for maintaining catecholamine balance. For somebody with a higher COMT activity, one concept is that rapid catecholamine metabolism may contribute to a tendency toward lower catecholaminergic tone after repeated demand, particularly in your prefrontal circuits, dopamine of course. The COMT genotype interacts with stress exposure and can influence prefrontal activity and cognition. Stress-related methylation of the valine allele may also alter the COMT expression. This is why I tend to bring up epigenetics, how genetics and environment can be influenced rather than being in a static, unmovable position, right? Why is it a comma? It should be a period. So similar to how I made that video on cancer and what you should do, while your doctors are doing the best for you, you're into, let's say you're lucky, you're going to MD Anderson, right? You're getting the best care, the doctors. While you're doing all that, I'm telling people, like just don't do nothing, right? Start changing your diet, right? Start getting more sunlight. Start, taking supplements that are going to help you, right? Start removing copper. Start removing nickel, right? Start removing toxic things from your life, right? Be in a better mood, If you're lacking magnesium, take magnesium, right? When it comes to that kind of thing, there's always something you could do, right? I don't give a damn what your situation is in life. There's always a way around it, right? And this is how people should be thinking. Whatever you're stuck in life, there's a way around it. And that always works. Because there is a way around it, right? Don't ever give up, If no one believes in you, I believe in you, right? Because that's the human spirit, that's the human condition. We're here because our ancestors never gave up, right? If not, we wouldn't be here. So take pride in that, right? That's what I tell people, right? No matter what happens, you always going to get through it. Whether it was the Black Plague, or wars, or famine, or a disease that happened a few years ago, and so on. Humans are still going to be here, right? Whether it was the meteor that hit meltwater ice pulse 1b and it caused the Great Flood around 12,500 years ago, we're still living, eh? We got sisters that still made it, and they're why we're still here, and we kept going, right? So never give up. Always go, right? There's those that meet obstacles in life, but without obstacles and difficulties in life, then we can't truly appreciate how sweet life can be, right? So, always have a good frame of mind and a frame of thought. So when things happen, whatever, go around it. But again, right, if you're a fast COMT type, you're probably already chill like that. But again, it's important to think in a positive way. So good things happen. If you think bad shit happens. It's just the way it is, right? We live in an informational universe, and what that means is what you know is what you get. What you don't know is what you don't get. So learning's important. So, right here, I want to talk about how I don't ever want people to feel hopeless, right? Or helpless. Always do something, right? So it's where things get exciting. It's where you sort of get power, right? In a Promethean nature. Here I am taking fire from the gods and I'm giving it to you guys so you could have a better quality of life. And take a little more dopamine, understand yourself. Because you can work on reducing your stress, improve sleep, get quality nutrition, alter your environment, get rid of inflammation. That's what my whole Patreon's about, right? Getting better health. So again, you have tyrosine, dopa, which turns into dopamine, noradrenaline, adrenaline. This is part of your catecholamine. So why chronic stress can be particularly important. So for example, let's imagine two people, right? Experiencing the same stressful environment. Person A has a relatively slower COMT activity. This is anxiety and worrying. Person B has a higher COMT activity. This is, they're relaxed, slackerish, chill. And their catecholamine systems are going to respond differently. So let's add some factors, right? They both get poor sleep, 5-6 hours. They undereat food, around 1,800 calories. They're pretty nutrient deficient. We'll say standard American diet. They rely on fast food and pastries and sodas and crap. They do an hour gym every day because they don't know better, right? They both have a family to take care of. Blood sugar instability because not enough proteins or fat, right? They're relying on coffee, sodas, and energy drinks all day, so that's going to mess with them. Scenario, evacuation due to a bomb threat or visible fire occurs in a crowded building. So person A, which is a slower COMT type, due to having more dopamine, right, like way too much, can have a lot more anxiety and worry, and they may overreact in a seemingly hysterical way. They move around the building as fast as possible, or just freeze in place, not knowing what to do, right? Then you got person B, they're going to be a little worried, a little tinge of anxiety maybe, but overall they're going to be cool, calm, composed. They're going to get their stuff, walk out of the building, right? Whereas person A just probably ran out without getting his stuff, right? So point being, right, like, this mutation is interesting, and it matters and it impacts us, right? And depending on whether you don't have this mutation, right, depending on what you do, for your body, right, it's important to make sure your dopamine is working as well as possible. So you don't have too much causing issues, or you don't have too low causing, I like the pleasure, right? Who doesn't want to feel good, right? Pleasure is good, it's great. It's the carrot on the stick for life. So frame your mind in such a way where everything's going to be a carrot and a stick for you, right? Where you always imagine a worthwhile outcome that is worthy, that will add depth to your life. Because if you have this, Fast COMT, you're just trying to whatever, and then it amounts to nothing, right? So have a goal in place, right? And strive for it. That way, when you hit it, you're like, yay, but like with a little bigger smile, right? And you can enjoy it more. So the biochemical environment becomes even more important because this is why genetic variants should be thought of as a modifier of physiology. It becomes almost innate as your personality and who you are as a person. We all know people that are just too chill and relaxed, or people that are on the opposite spectrum, right? They just worry greatly about any little thing. They're just worried, right? And, I mean, we're all going to have worries, right? But some people just have a crazy amount of worry. Some people have a little bit of worry. A person with CMT, right, can have like a really grave worry, right? And they're just like, yeah, I'll deal with it. Whereas, a person with, the slow CMT, right? They're probably worrying crazy about what to work tomorrow, right? It just depends, right? Everyone's different. And this genetically does impact everybody. In this case, one way or the other, or you're kind of balanced in the middle. So I think for a while this was a meme, right? He's just a chill guy, right? He's cool. When everyone's stressing about exams, but I'm just a chill guy who's taking it easy. That's a good portion of people, right? And you probably know one. So the SAM connection. So here's where nutrition becomes important, and it plays that role. So COMT doesn't remove dopamine directly, but it methylates catecholamine, catechol compound, COMT, does this by using SAM, right, which is S-adenosylmethionine. This donates a methyl group to the catechol compound. After donating the methyl group, it then becomes S-adenosyl-homocysteine, which eventually feeds into the broader methionine-homocysteine cycle. COMT activity is connected to the body's overall methylation economy system, more or less. Conceptually, integrating enough proteins to have methionine for SAM, but of course, then we get into folate, B12, and other nutrients that are pretty important. And this is where nutrition matters, and then we'll talk about nuance for folate, because, it's different depending on your mutations, right, if you have one. So COMT requires magnesium for its enzymatic reactions. Magnesium helps coordinate the components involved in transferring the methyl group from SAM to the catechol substrate. So COMT genotype determines part of the enzyme's inherent activity, which is the genetic part. But also don't forget the epigenetic part, which is the nutritional and physiological factors influencing how your enzyme is going to operate, right? So here you get the power, right? So that's why you need to have magnesium intake, right? A good amount of it when discussing COMT. Because, again, the objective isn't to take a crazy amount, to slow it down, or to take too little of it, the point is to just have your body work as well as possible. And the reality is, food today is not as nutritious in magnesium as I wish it was back then, right? That's why I tell my clients to use a magnesium chloride lotion, rub it onto your skin. It's really good at raising your magnesium levels. On a hair test, on a blood test, it's pretty good compared to a magnesium pill. And again, I have a whole article on magnesium. You click here, and it tells you about all the cool stuff it does, right? Because you need it for a lot of things, right? But you know, like magnesium helps you with retaining potassium, right? If you have issues with potassium, it helps you with your calcium to balance it from preventing excessive firing of certain signaling things. It's just pretty cool. It's badass, right? You know, people today have a terrible diet, and it messes with mental health, and there's just so much mental health stuff, right? I don't like I'll be honest, right? I don't think my generation, the generation before or after, are giant fucking pussies, like pathetic. I think we were these generations raised and processed junk foods and fast foods that the boomers and the silent generation didn't live through. They lived through it, you know, of course, you know, after they were adults, right? So they were already formed as well as possible, right? So my generations, right, before and after, in this one, they were raised in inflammation. They were raised with a lot of crap that affected them, and that's why I'm saying, right, we're we're kind of weaker than, you know, the boomers in that regard in terms of health problems, right? Where the boomers get it later, I mean, hell, we're having people with cancer in their 20s and 30s now, right? And it's worrisome, right? That's why I care about health so much, and why I want my generations to thrive now as adults. So when they have their children, they make good, smart, healthy choices for their kids. So those kids grow up unaffected or mitigating as much crap as possible. So they're awesome and they're badass, and then they pass on that healthy way of living, healthy way of thinking. So their kids are even more cooler and badass and smarter and taller than them, right? And so on, right? That way one day we have this awesome generation of kids, right, that are just like, you know, Adonis, right? You know, perfect. You know, they're all big, they're all strong, they're all healthy, they're all just amazing, right? And that being said, they figure out problems we couldn't figure out, right? Because we were too sick and inflamed to get through things, right? And that's the best gift you could give your child, right? Amazing health. So what about methylfolate, folic acid, and folinic acid / calcium folinate, right? So COMT discussions on methylfolate can be conflicting. People are always arguing. Again, nuance is important. You'll see people argue that Fast COMT needs methylfolate or that they can't tolerate methylfolate. We'll get into it, right? Because people say things that could be true, or it could be true but wrong for someone else, right? You know what I mean? Like context matters. So this one professor, right? Cool guy, really old, very wise, thinking for judicial policy, right? And again, right? You know, he studies the law, right? And anyone that knows the law, right, should know pretty fucking well, right? Sure, the law is his thing, but there's other laws that also, you know, interact with that law, right? And we should take that perspective into everything, right? Well, it depends. That was his big phrase, right? Well, it depends, and that's important for fucking anything, right? Because anybody can make a blanket statement, right? It could be true or false, right? But within the right context, and you explain it, well, it depends. You give it the context, and then things make sense or don't make sense, right? So that's really important. That's where the nuance really kicks in. This is why it matters. So let's take a nuanced look at this. COMT uses SAM as its methyl donor, but the availability of SAM is influenced by the entire methylation network. So you need folate and vitamin B12 participating in the recycling of homocysteine towards methionine, which then gives you fuel for SAM production, right? Therefore, you need to have folate in your body. A good folate, of course, right? You need a working form of folate so your B12 can help with methionine metabolism for SAM availability for methylation reactions. But that does not mean someone with a fast COMT automatically needs high dose methylfolate. Correcting a genuine deficiency is really different from assuming that a genetic variant requires more methylated vitamins. So here are two factors to consider: the folate form and all the other nutrients you will need to make it work. For the most part, methylfolate will work on anyone as it's the active form of folate. This becomes almost necessary for people that have the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase enzyme gene mutation, MTHFR. Some people call it the motherfucker gene. I think it sounds funny. But they can not effectively use folic acid as a conversion is not efficient. So mind you, every food that's fortified, like the flours, that kind of stuff, they add folic acid. It's synthetic. If you don't have the mutation, you could use it. You still don't use it. You still don't use it well, right? That's the point I want to make. It sucks ass, and I'll get on that. Because you got to do more conversions. than you would with getting it from food, right? Because food skips a form of it, and taking a calcium folinate is kind of like that too. Whereas where you take a methylfolate, you skip all that and you have the actual active form, right? So, I'll explain it later. I don't want to jump the gun, right? So, I argue that folic acid is crappy to begin with because the body needs 400 micrograms of daily folate. The body needs twice that amount to match the daily requirements in terms of folic acid. But half of that is when people start to see a bottlenecking of unmetabolized folic acid, which means there is less conversion over time. This is not even factoring a person with the motherfucker gene. You know, this mutation maybe reduces your absorption of folic acid by like 30-70%, right? So there's two great tools to use, right? Methylfolate and folinic acid, which is also known as calcium folinate. The more important part of nuance and understanding, if a person has a fast COMT, a slow COMT, and also has a motherfucker gene mutation, right? So a person with a fast COMT and or also has a MTHFR mutation is more than likely going to do better with methylfolate. That's because they get the active form of B9 folate to bypass the precursor folate conversions, and it helps people too as a fast COMT get their dopamine, right, and their catecholamines faster. Calcium folinate could potentially not be enough for meaningful impact overall mood, right? So you're taking calcium folinate, you might need a little more of that. If you're taking a methylfolate and you're feeling really good on that, then that's good. If you're taking way too much methylfolate and you're feeling kind of hyper and getting a bit of anxiety, that's a sign to kind of like stop doing too much, right? Because some people take it and it's like the most amazing thing ever. Some people take it and it's just way too much, right? So this is why a person that has a slow COMT, right? The people that have anxiety and they're worried a lot, they shouldn't take a methyl form, right? Because that could really fuck with them. Whereas you have the opposite problem, you're getting through dopamine too quick, so you kind of want to have more of your folate to, get it going for dopamine and to send me going and to get those, to get the process going smoothly, right? To make it easy. A person with a slow COMT and or with a motherfucker mutation is more than likely going to do better with calcium folinate / folinic acid. This is because they skip half of the folate conversion to get to the active form of B9. This is helpful as people with slow COMT are much slower to deplete their dopamine and other catecholamines. Methylfolate could potentially exacerbate the symptoms of a slow COMT. Not to mention, a person with a normal COMT should find the balance between a calcium folinate or methylfolate. A methylfolate makes me feel pretty hyper or anxiety, then perhaps it's best to switch to a calcium folinate. At the end of the day, try what works best for you. If you find folate to be an interesting topic, then, I think I wrote about that somewhere else, so yeah, click there. So, people talking about how folic acid is necessary, and they equate folic acid as folate. I gotta disagree with that. Let's go back to nature for a bit, right? Let's use the nature argument. So if you get it from food, right, you already have tetrahydrofolate. But if you get it from folic acid, then you gotta do the dehydrofolate, which means you gotta do a bullshit conversion here your body never ever did before or had to do, right? So if you take a food folate, it's a little similar to a calcium folinate because you're starting here. Then you do your conversions here, then you get the active form, right? Again, the methylation messes with it because ultimately this is the one you want in the end. Oh man, I think I got a sneeze. I got a sneeze coming. It's in there. I'll try my best. So point being, right, there is a right folate for you. If you're a fast COMT and you have the motherfucker gene, then a methylfolate is going to be great for you. If you aren't too keen on that and you're the slow type, right, then a calcium folinate will be better because it's not going to exacerbate as much as it would a stronger active form of a methylfolate. If you're in the middle, find a balance, right? Some people like calcium folinate, they feel a lot more chiller on that. Some people take a methylfolate, they feel a little more hyper, a little more active, but at the same time, too much could make them feel like they got anxiety. So again, it's about finding perfect balance. They might make a supplement out there that has like 2 of them, and you're kind of like in the middle. So, it just depends, right? Folate's really important, right? Pregnancy, your blood cells, mental health, your hormones. It's really important. So when I shit on folic acid, I do it out of love because, and here's what I find interesting. There was a study I read, right, where women that were pregnant, that were taking folic acid, were more likely to have children with the motherfucker gene, right? The methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase enzyme, gene mutation, polymorphism, however you want to call it, because there's different SNPs and crap that happens. Point being, right, if that's the case, we should ban folic acid, because then it's causing gene mutation that's screwing over people, right? So again, that's really fucking interesting, right? We should probably look into that and ban folic acid, because it ain't helping the way we were thinking it's helping, right? You know, it's just important, right? I mean, I think just ban pregnant women from taking it, because that's fucked up and it's disastrous, right? That's like setting up the entirety of humanity for failure and defeat by having issues with their folate, which is very much necessary for the body, right? You know, just these are things we got to consider as a people, as a nation, as a culture, and around the world. Well, let's tell the Japanese about this, because I know the Japanese will actually do something about this, because they care about their people. So, okay. Well, eating complete animal-based protein becomes essential in many ways. So SAM production depends on methionine. Methionine is an essential amino acid from dietary protein. If you don't have enough protein, then you could theoretically impair your methionine needed for normal methylation metabolism. So this is one reason for why a nutritionally adequate diet containing sufficient high-quality protein is pretty important. If you know my stance on protein, then you know that all sources of proteins are the same. To make a long story short, animal-based protein is a complete protein, which means it has all of your essential amino acids. Again, whether you have beef, bison, or lamb, depending where you're from, or if you're an Indian goat, you know, yeah, just that's gonna be your best source of, your protein. And not just that, but some vitamins, some minerals, really important. You know, it's really good with your zinc and selenium and other stuff, right? It's a hell of a package. That's why I like it a lot. So why do I not subscribe to the wishful belief of a plant-based vegan or vegetarian diet? Again, these diets are not the best sources at providing methionine, along with many other nutrients involved in neurotransmitter metabolism. This is why we see people at the extremes go from a failing hardcore vegan vegetarian diet to a flourishing on a hardcore carnivore diet. Eventually, you know, I get into the fiber and into keto, into low carb, and they have much more flexibility in life because they're less toxic and they're getting rid of bile that's influencing their health, right? So don't forget B12 and where you get it from. Vitamin B12 deserves a special attention because it's required by methionine synthase, which helps convert homocysteine back into methionine. If you have a person with a high homocysteine, right, they get their levels checked, right, it's considered a source of inflammation. It's an important marker some people consider. You could be lacking B12 for that reason, amongst other things. But the pathway regenerates methionine for SAM. Methionine is also used to make cysteine for glutathione. So again, if you're pretty low on that, you're probably using that, you know, to make glutathione if you're under an inflammation, which I do have a good beginner article linked, right, on that. So a B12 deficiency can interfere with methylation metabolism, regardless of someone's COMT genotype. This is one reason why correcting a B12 deficiency may be just as meaningful as getting your folate right. And again, I must respectfully address that most plant-based food is lacking when it comes to B12. Vegans, vegetarians must rely on B12 supplementation or they would not exist. It's a hard fact for people to understand, right? Because if you look historically in cultures, right, and that they were plant-based, right, they would drink some kind of milk, they would do a little bit of meat, they would do maybe some fish, and they would be okay, right? And they would continue living. But now you get this sort of retarded PETA fucking ideology that somehow by going, you know, plants only, you're better than everybody, which is really, you know, like up your own ass. Because, you know, if you didn't watch The Lion King, you did not know about the cycle of life, right? It just annoys me, right? You know, unless you're that chick dressed up as a naked lobster with the big tits that was like trying to do like that dumb, you know, activism thing. I don't care for that, right? That was nice to look at. But point being, right, is we do need meat. You know, humans, you know, God made an amazing design for humans, right? He could have picked one or the other based on our teeth, our digestion, having small intestines and large intestines, We can do it all. That's badass. So, you know, in any extreme scenario, we could not live in a thriving way, but we could subsist and survive, right? You know, like I mentioned about our ancestors, right? They went through hard times and still got through, right? Whether it was only living on potatoes or tubers or getting a bit of meat here and there when they can or blubber like the Inuits, humans are pretty resourceful and they'll figure shit out, right? So if you're doing it for a spiritual reason, I'll respect it, right? But don't do it into death, right? You know, like understand your weaknesses, understand your nutrient deficiencies. But you're doing plant based because you think you're, going to be healthy. That's not the case. A lot of people, they do convert, they do change, and it's sad to see people suck into this parasitic ideology that harms them. And there's people around them that see this, they know this, and they do everything they can to stop it, but they can't because they're so up their own ass about it, right? Like that one, like, I don't know how many times I've seen like a hardcore vegan fucking die, and they were like worse than Ariana Grande, right? Like they were just bone and skin, no muscles. I feel bad, because they truly, in their head, believe they're doing something good, right? But you know, the animals still are going to kill and eat other animals, right? And we're part of the food chain, right? If we're swimming and a shark comes, we're fucked, right? There's no fucking shark that's anti-human. You know what I mean? Like, it's reality, right? If I piss off a lion and it eats me, I'm a dumbass, and that's my fault, right? But point being, right, is you can't deprive yourself because humans have, through a period of time, whether it was God, whether it was aliens, whether it's, you know, the sort of Darwinism that went on. Point being, we thrive pretty damn well on meat, and there's a lot of nutrients ubiquitous. We tend to think it's ubiquitous, right? Also found in plants. And yeah, there are many things found in plants, right? But there's very special things only found in meat, right? Or animal-based foods, right? So don't forget it. And if you're vegan vegetarian and you're failing and you're having a bad time, please, for the sake of your own health and people around you that love you, change, right? Because it's what, 2026 August. It's time to throw that away, right? Because at that point, I'm thinking it's just really bad ideology that's destroying people, right? Almost as bad as the Kellogg guy who made cereal as a form of anti-masturbation, right? Like, what kind of shit is that, right? Right? Like, come on, really? We do live in a world full of crazy people, right? And I'm not here to say people are crazy, but that things they do can be crazy, right? Big difference there. So again, right? Depression, that's a big one with vegans, vegetarians. And then they go to their counselors and their therapists and they're like, well, you should be healthy. No, like you're missing shit that's supposed to help your mental health to make you healthy, right? But even then, right, even if you're not that way, right, there are people, with a lot of inflammation, Central American diet, very low protein, very low animal based, a lot of bread and pasta, that kind of thing, donuts, living on grains. I mean, you'll subsist, but you won't hit a optimal form of health that's really gonna bring you up, And this is our goal here, right? So again, methylation has buddies, right? They work together, How I had the series on electrolytes with how the sodium and the potassium and the magnesium and the calcium, they all work together. They're buddies, right? They need each other. Without each other, they're useless. So here, right, methylation has buddies, right? You need B9, you need B12, you need B6, you need riboflavin, B2. You need choline, right? Or betaine. So these nutrients, they contribute to different parts of the system. Folate supports 1-carbon transfer reactions. B12 required for methionine synthase. B6 participates in transsulfuration and numerous amino acid reactions, to change and convert some of them. B2 supports enzymes involved in folate and homocysteine metabolism. Choline can be converted into betaine, which can donate to methyl groups to homocysteine and deliver in kidneys, or eat more protein for betaine, right? There was a point where betaine was considered or proposed to be a B vitamin. I thought that was interesting. So as an important aside, if you're under a lot of inflammation, methionine cysteine could be used up a lot for making glutathione to fight against free radicals, which are the 1 electrons, and non-RAC oxidants, which are the 2 electrons, And this would drive up more demand for these amino acids and B vitamins, right? So the moral of the story is going plant-based will not benefit your mental health, and have yet to see any of my clients agree that it was ever good for them, right? The people I talk to that went vegan vegetarian, they've always regretted it. I have yet to find one that was like, well, maybe it was kind of good. No, they all abhorred it, right? Like, people say if I go back in time and change a mistake, I would. That's the kind of thing they consider their plant-based phase to be, right? But again, right, we do live in a world where people need to touch a hot, burning, steaming stove to understand it is in fact hot. Other people have the wisdom to look at that and be like, yeah, I'm not going to touch that. I know it's fucking hot. I know the consequences if I touch it. But again, right, we're all different, right? Some people can touch the stove. Some people, they're wiser. So, again, besides the immense PETA feelings of superiority from not eating animals, it eventually wanes off. So vitamin D, of course, sunlight. I'm not too much in getting vitamin D from food. I'm like, really? B2, again, you'll get it from all these sources, but again, it won't be a lot. Calcium, I mean, you'll get it, but it'll be like a calcium oxalate, so not even the best kind of calcium, like the hydroxyapatite, which is what the body uses, really. Iron, yeah, even if you take all these foods, you're going to have really shitty iron levels, even if you take it with vitamin C. Iodine, algae, sure, cool. Yeah, seaweeds. Table salt, yeah, why not? Zinc, whole grains, pulses, as always seeds. Barely any, Selenium, same thing. A little bit of cabbage, a little broccoli. Like, why? Why do you gotta? It's like Invincible, right? Look at what they need to mimic a fraction of our power. You know, just a small amount of meat. Kicks ass of all the nutrient density of supposed veggies, right? So just eat a little bit of meat, right? If you still want to be plant based for whatever reason, right? Just drink some milk, right? Do some meat, and no, you won't be in amazing health as other people, right? Because you chose to make that sacrifice, right, for spiritual reasons, right? Hence the reason why a lot of Hindus are plant based, right? And their health sucks. So again, keep in mind, right? Fast COMT and antidepressant response. What about the influences and responses to antidepressant treatment? How is valine affected, right? Some studies have reported poor antidepressant responses among people with this genotype, the fast one. For example, one study of 256 people with major depression found that the people that were val carriers had significantly worse response during the first 6 months of antidepressant treatment compared to other genotypes. The authors think that higher COMT activity and consequently lower dopamine availability might be the reason why they did not do better, right? So again, right, drugs impact people differently. And COMT, depending on the mutation, which one you have, it could be why someone who takes one of those drugs does better, why another one does bad. At the end of the day, they're all terrible, in my opinion, right? Just an opinion. But, it depends, right? Everyone's different. For example, one study found that the COMT genotype influenced responses to mirtazapine, or mirtazapine, but not paroxetine. The valine and the valine-methionine participants actually responded better than the methionine, the people with the slow COMT, when compared to those taking the mirtazapine. This is interesting as it would suggest mirtazapine is better for people with a fast COMT. Regardless of my opinion, again, I'm not a medical doctor, of course. Most clients I talk to do not want medication to be treated. They want to make a meaningful lifestyle and dietary choices that they can be free from the consequences of pharmaceutical drug side effects. Some even remarked that taking these antidepressant drugs fried their brain, ruining their health, going through some very difficult years of their life. And the kind of struggle they do not wish on their worst enemy. There's a lot of stories out there about people that took SSRIs and they're just fucked. They're honestly, like, there's no easier way for me to say that. They're fucked. Their brain's fried. Like, they're in the lowest position mentally they've ever been than ever, right? Like, if you had rock bottom, they're below rock bottom, right? So, yeah, it's a hell of a risk, right? Do you take that gamble? Or should you, focus on your lifestyle, the foods you eat, your nutrition, your health, before doing that, right? I do find it kind of crazy, right? How COMT and MTHFR aren't considered, reasons, like in the DSM-5. Like, it never once said, oh, what if, like, if you fix these things, right, maybe they won't get depressed, right? Maybe they will feel better, right? No, it's lacking, right? It's not holistic, right? And it's actually, to an extent, right, kind of very, very subjective. Like, very fucking subjective, right? Like, almost like it's an opinion, right? I think you're depressed. You get a second opinion, I don't think you're depressed. You get a third opinion, a little bit, but, And for some people, I mean, they get them prescribed easily, like getting candy from the store, right? So I'm just worried about that, right? Is what we're doing harming society at large? I'm just saying, you look at people that take a gun, they go to a place, they shoot people up, they look at their medical records, and they're on a Prozac or some shit, right? I'm just saying, right? Like, we need to think deeply clear and concise about this, right? Because there are factors that contribute to certain things that aren't bad, right? You read some of the side effects, may cause side effect, may cause harm or violence. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? Like, how is this even a thing? That's a hell of a wager. Should we start treating this like gambling? You know? There's a 10% chance you might commit a horrific crime, right? So, why not, right? Take those odds, right? But if you do commit the crime, right, and you do kill someone, right, then you 100% did that, right? I know recently there was that one woman that killed her 3 kids, and she was on um, like 10 or 15 medications, right? Do people not think the polypharmacy effect of that would maybe psychologically fuck her up in some way, right? 10, 15 medications. I mean, drugs are designed to alter your body, your mind, your physiology, and you're different, right? But to take that amount of, I don't know what the drugs were, right? But just even knowing, right, that there's interactions with drugs and how it fucks with your liver, how it impacts you, then yeah, I mean that's not a good thing, right? Maybe it was a ticking time bomb all along, right? But of course, people got to jump on and hate the woman, or the women got to blame the man, or there's all these factors, right? And I'm like, look at the medications, look at the people who shot in certain places where you know places of learning, right? That shouldn't have ever happened, right? That under normal circumstances would have never happened, right? Had they not have been on such a drug. But it's cool that society is waking up. They're realizing, they're understanding that yeah, um, you keep eating enough of these blueberries and they're going to kill you, more or less, right? But yeah, I digress a lot. So again, talk to your doctor, right? I'm not a doctor, but there are some really good doctors out there, and they tend to be like functional medicine, holistic, like within that realm, right? Outside of that, they're kind of weird, like Seinfeld weird, right? And I don't want to shun anybody, right? Because maybe they do know something I don't know, right? That you can't even study in a sort of spectral way, right? But just because you can't measure something doesn't mean it's real, right? So why fast COMT doesn't automatically mean depression? I want to emphasize that a fast COMT does not mean you're going to be depressed or guaranteed to have depression, right? But rather, through nutritional deficiencies, it may affect your mood and behavior to that of depression easily or similarly, right? There was a study on COMT. They found no differences, including when looking at men and women. Another one concluded variations are consistently associated with certain brain emotional processing phenotypes than with depression. So, again, right, people can mistaken having this fast COMT for being depressed, right? When they're not depressed, right? It's important to understand that, and I kind of talk about this later, right? I don't want to jump the gun here again. But yes, does my clickbait title mean that a fast COMT causes depression? It's not a yes and it's not a no, because everyone's different. There's many factors. But remember, it depends, and we went over important nutritional factors that impact your dopamine, right? So fix your nutrition, reduce inflammation, read my, stuff on Patreon. A lot of it's free, and I got like a lot of videos like this, so you will find valuable nuggets of truth, right? Sometimes just a sentence is all you need that'll, boom, fix your health or make a meaningful change, right? A faster COMT influences catecholamine availability and stress-related brain function, affecting certain depressive symptoms or treatment response in some people. People who have their nutrition down will enjoy their dopamine more than those who do not, right? So again, that's important. The best way to view this is like an assembly line where the workers are sending a package so fast. They're doing this so fast that they're often they're waiting, man. Like, hey, man, send more packages down, right? Like, I'm done. I'm bored of my job, right? I need work. Bring me work. That's kind of how being a fast COMT is like, right? It's converting dopamine pretty quick. So, by focusing on the factors you can influence, you're basically sending out more packages down the line to keep the workers busy, right? So, defining depression, MDD, major depressive disorder, understanding the subjective view of it and what it actually is, right? So this is important, right? Because, it's just the world we live in, right? It's important to define the term depression. I say this because people tend to use the words in an emotionally charged state through loaded rhetoric rather than using words as logically defined in a dictionary, right? People want to be so fucking dramatic, right? And sometimes people just have a dramatic or flamboyant vocabulary when they just talk like that. Like when people say, I'm starving, right? Like, no, you're hungry. If you were starving, you'd be like 2-3 days without eating, right? Second factor I find is people will say they're depressed based on subjective factors they consider to be depression, but is not logically consistent with the defined term, right? Like they're sad for a moment about any little thing, right? Like example, right? Dolly Parton died. I'm depressed. And then tomorrow, they're okay, they're cool, they're happy, you're not depressed. You just feel sad for that bit of time, right? That's all it is. I mean, you could call depression the big long sad, right? Because that's what it is, over 2 weeks. The third factor I find worrying are people who self-diagnose their mental health through AI apps like ChatGPT when it comes to figuring out these issues. People in general do not know that these, what's it called? It's a large language model or something, right? That by default, they're very agreeable, depending on how you phrase a question. Well, it'll pretty much agree with you. So again, beware in how you type things, right? So in how you ask questions, legally only a doctor can diagnose a person with a disease. So beware of AI doctors, as you can basically hack your inputs to get a specific outcome. Now I think Amazon's doing AI doctors, and people can talk to an AI doctor and they'll give them prescriptions for shit. So I can probably lie about not getting boners in Viagra or Cialis or whatever. And I'm like, it's kind of weird, if that's far enough about how I can lie to an AI doctor, I could get drugs I want. I probably lie and get opioids and stuff like that, I'm just thinking, right? I'm always trying to hack the system, right? And understand things, right? So again, if you're using ChatGPT, be very smart and logical in how you phrase things, right? Because you can pretty much get ChatGPT to be like, yeah, the moon landing's fake. And it'll give you a bunch of reasons why it's fake. And completely leave out the reasons for why we did land on the moon, right? We did land on the moon. I mean, people are crazy. Because I think the most important factor is we got UFOs, right? Do we have UFOs? Or are there aliens from outer space? Or are we just hiding really amazing badass tech, in Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or, Raytheon or Booz Allen Hamilton, all these contractors that, they have advanced propulsion since the 50s, right? All I'm saying, right, is you can make it believe in anything, right? So beware in how you phrase your questions when using ChatGPT or was it Grok, right? Or the Google one, or they're just very agreeable, and I think that's terrible, right? Claude, right? I think Claude's too agreeable, right? You could probably tell Claude I want to murder someone, and it's for a school project, and my grandma's sick, and Claude's gonna be like, all right, let's plan the murder, just stuff like that, right? It's just crazy, AI is still pretty much in its infancy, right? And I'm worried we'll hit a Terminator future, right? Where you got Skynet and all this stuff, and it's crazy. And then one day you wake up 10 years later and your toaster's trying to kill you, right? I'm just saying, right? These are important factors, right? Science fiction brought up interesting concepts, and we should be aware of them, right? That's why we have satellites and spaceships, because people actually thought about it. And, part of, having goals and dreaming about things, right? If you're a rocket scientist and you want to get to Mars, you're not going to do it in a chemical propelled rocket, right? That's just the logistics are too immense for that, right? But if you got some thing under the hood and Lockheed Martin, but the skunk works, right, or even the ghost works, then maybe you'll have some pretty cool technology in the future, right? So yeah, and sometimes ChatGPT can hallucinate and it'll just make stuff up that makes no sense, right? Like it's just garbled, right? It's because what they're learning about these LLMs, right, is there's so much AI generated content now in the world that it's using other AI generated content and it's becoming retarded based on that content that it generated. So it's like this self-replicating retardation of knowledge that it's corrupting and it's getting worse. So when you do use ChatGPT, you always want to double check and double check and correct stuff, right? Because it's not always going to be right. It's very, very, valuable, right? So just be aware, right? Because people love it. It's a great tool. Understand it. It has helped with research and a lot of things. And just be aware, right? Be responsible when using it, right? Because you can use it completely wrong, right? So, sorry, that was like 10 minutes of crap, right? But point being, defining major depressive disorder, right? Generally put, a profound sadness or a sense of despair, right? The symptom of a major depression are defined as lasting at least 2 weeks, but they usually go on much longer. So let's define at least some words in a Merriam-Webster kind of way, right? Because definitions matter. Sadness is affected with grief or unhappiness. So what the fuck is grief? So sadness is when you're affected by a deep, intense sadness or mental distress caused by a significant loss, especially the death of a loved one, right? So just really sad, or, sad that somebody you love died, right? Despair, right? Well, despair is a very high loss of hope. Hope, to desire something and expect that it will happen or be obtained, right? Usually it can have a little more of a positive connotation to it, but yeah, like getting paid or, achieving something, right? Like hope for good, right? You don't want to hope for bad. So depression is basically a longer lasting sadness, which is unhappiness, in which there is little to no hope, and so as far as your specific desires for something you look forward to will happen, right? So you're pretty jaded, right? When you're sad. Not happy. So it's not so simple after all. Here's the criteria used by psychiatrists when attempting to diagnose major depressive disorder based on the DSM. This is the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, aka DSM, it's in its 5th version. So, like I say, right, what if eating nourishing foods in such a way can affect your neurotransmitters, your hormones, overall mental health? It can. I truly believe so. Because I've helped people get better, right? I've had issues, I got better too, right? Like, we can't tell people this doesn't work. Because it does work, right? But, I am skeptical about people that say, like, really dumb shit on the internet, and they do things that don't work, and they're like, it doesn't work. Because, again, right, there's just so much information out there, and people will give you bad information, terrible information, abhorrent information. Some people give you, like, interesting information that's helpful. Some people give you really cool and informative information that does make an impact, and it makes you, the person you're happy to be now. So, yeah, very important. But let's look at the DSM pretty quick, right? So to be considered major depressive disorder, right? Again, don't self-diagnose, go to a doctor. Because again, you don't want to do that agreeable thing with ChatGPT or even to yourself, right? Because that happens sometimes. 5 or more of the following symptoms have been present during the same 2-week period and represents a change from the previous functioning. At least one of the symptoms is either depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure, right? So you do not include symptoms that are clearly attributed to another medical condition, right? So I think sometimes people can forget about that and they double dip, right? Depressed most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by subjective report. Sad, empty, hopeless. Other people see that in you. Also tearful, sad, you cry, right? You are markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities. Most of the day, nearly every day. As indicated by subjective account or observation. You're just not doing the things you used to do anymore that you enjoy. Okay, here we got significant weight loss when not dieting or weight gain. Change of more than 5% of body weight in a month. Or decrease. Or increase. And appetite more or less every day. I mean, just, that's not useful, right? You're sad, so you eat more. Yeah, maybe because you want dopamine. You're not want to eat, so you have less need for dopamine. Maybe there's something there, right? Insomnia or hypersomnia nearly every day. Can't really sleep. Psychomotor agitation, retardation. I love that word. Doesn't mean you're dumb. It just means every day observable by others. I'm rarely subject to feelings of restlessness or being slowed down. It just means like instead of being kind of like who you are, you're a lot less. You're slower. You're more reserved. You're quieter. You know, that's what it means. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. Now, come on, that's kind of vague. A lot of things can cause that, right? But if you're from like 100 to 0, then yeah, that may be an issue. Feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, which may be delusional. So leave out being Catholic. Funny joke. Nearly every day, not merely self-reproach or guilt about being sick. So again, right, that's a big one, right? I think that's something that does deserve actual, care, right? Because that's not a usual thing to be feeling, right? Just to make you know, to be sure about that. Diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness every day, either by subjective account, again, subjective, right? Or observed by others. So you can't really make decisions and you kind of suck at concentrating. You're not as good as you were at concentrating, right? Again, context matters. Maybe you're tired and gonna sleep, right? Due to the insomnia, right? So, that's interesting, right? Maybe you had insomnia due to myco or mold toxicity, right? That affects your sleep. Maybe you have the low COMT, right? So you have too much dopamine, that affects your sleep and you get anxiety, right? Just factors to consider, right? Like everything matters, right? Everything impacts something, right? It's like a giant spider web. You tug here, this other part's gonna get tugged here, and it's gonna move, right? It's not exactly ghost particles in physics, but yeah, like things do matter when they move. Recurrent thoughts of death and anxious fear of dying, recurrent suicidal ideations without a specific plan or a suicide attempt or a specific plan for committing suicide. Again, not normal, right? So if you have that issue, yeah, call the hotline, right? Or, go see a really caring or good doctor or mental health counselor or, get help from your friends or family, right? Because, yeah, suicide is not a normal thing, right? Like, you should never ever think about suicide, right? But again, right, if you're taking drugs, that might cause that. If you're taking certain pharmaceuticals, that could be a side effect. I do know mold, right? Mold, I've heard people talk about this, right? When they get mold toxicity, those spores colonize their body, they start thinking shit they'll never think of ever, right? Doom, gloom, anxiety, bad, terrible thoughts, right? Thoughts no one should ever have, right? So again, right? Were you sad because of a situation happened, or are there other factors that are causing this, right? Again, right? It's important to be very holistic in something, right? So you find the root cause. You don't find the root cause, you don't do it head on, then, I don't want people to be stuck in this mode, right? Like, depression sucks. So these symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social/occupational or other important areas of functioning. So essentially, like, it's causing you to become a dysfunctional person and, like you're not showering anymore, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not eating, things like that, right? Not grooming yourself. The episode is not attributable to the physiological effect of a substance or to another medical condition. Again, if you're taking a drug or medication that's causing it, then, that could be the factor to consider, right? The occurrence of major depressive episodes is not better explained by schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, schizophreniform disorder, delusional disorder, or other specified and unspecified schizophrenia spectrum, and other psychotic disorders. And there has never been a manic episode or a hypomanic episode, which means it's not usual or normal, right? I guess they'll give her bipolar or some shit, right? That's what it's referring to, right? From my unexpert opinion. No, the exclusion does not apply if all of the manic-like, hypomanic-like episodes are substance-induced or attributed to. So again, right? Big thing, right? So people smoke weed and they become fucking manic, right? Like, they get anxiety, they're worried, Whereas people think it should be, like calming. Some people, it fucks them up that way, right? So again, just to know, right? That can happen, right? Weed doesn't always chill you out, right? And again, don't do drugs, right? Drugs are, honestly, they're fucking gay. They're lame as shit, You're a grown-ass adult, right? We all got shit to deal with. But drugs don't make anything better. People get worse. They spiral even further down, right? So again, yeah, just don't do drugs. And someone like makes you want to do drugs, then that's not good. Get them out of your life, right? That's usually one of the biggest reasons why people do drugs. They have bad influences around them, right? So, if I was Hunter Biden, right, I would hang out with people that do drugs, right, like crack. But moving on. So, nutritional strategies for higher COMT activity. Again, you got the valine, so you have that going on pretty well, that enzyme. So, one is dopamine production supported well enough, right? This is the beginning of everything. Dopamine synthesis begins with tyrosine into L-dopa, into dopamine. The conversion of tyrosine into L-dopa requires tyrosine hydroxylase, which uses tetrahydrobiopterin as a cofactor. L-dopa is then converted into dopamine using B6-dependent aromatic L-amino acid decarboxylase. This means you need more than just B9 and B12. You're going to need adequate proteins to get tyrosine, right? You need some calcium, some iron, some B6, some vitamin C to help support your BH4 holistically. Again, electrolytes will also help you on that regard, which becomes relevant to dopamine synthesis, and especially, I think, magnesium. Did I put magnesium? Magnesium also plays a role there. Let's see. Magnesium. But keeping it simple, eat more red meat like beef. Get some dairy or cheese you enjoy. Get some fruits like strawberries or kiwis for vitamin C. Again, right, you want to make sure it's just running smooth, like a well-oiled machine, so you can get more dopamine, right? Is magnesium adequate? Again, because COMT requires magnesium for enzymes we spoke about earlier. Also, most people I see tend to be depleted in magnesium due to poor food availability, stress, alcohol, drugs, illness, smoking, or inflammation. In general, that depletes it all. Is B12 adequate? So a deficiency in B12 can interfere with methylation, as I spoke about earlier. Eat plenty of animal-based protein to get B12. Avoid being plant-based, or if you're doing it for purely spiritual reasons, get a B12 supplement and cover all your other nutrients you're not getting from being plant-based, right? I'm not an asshole, I'm not a cunt, right? If you want to do it for spiritual reasons, that's on you, but be smart about it, right? Just, I want to respect other people's religions and spirituality, right? Because, again, it's not my place to tell you about her, that kind of stuff, right? But, are you getting folate? That's a big one. Folate supports 1-carbon metabolism and methionine regeneration. Figure out if you have the MTHFR gene mutation or not to determine which type of folate we spoke about earlier. Again, that's a big one. That's a really big lever you got to pull and figure out and get the right one for, because that's going to make a big difference for a lot of people, right? I mean, big one. And if not, do the testing, right? It's better to know than to not know, right? Because I don't want you to self-diagnose and you're taking too much methylfolate and you're feeling real hyper and all weird, right? So you need to know yourself, right? I say right a lot, so I do apologize for that. It's just a habit of mine. Protein adequate. So protein supplies amino acids needed for neurotransmitter synthesis and methylation. Metabolism. So as I always tell my clients to get their protein from an animal-based source, as it contains the complete and most bioavailable/usable amino acids that you need. Love the beef, the bison, or the lamb as a daily staple. 30 grams of protein does not cut it. It's like the bare minimum for like muscle synthesis. Again, like I say, your body is more than just muscles. It helps you make neurotransmitters, right? What we're talking about right now. It helps you with, eating less, satiation, helps you make enzymes. Protein does a lot of stuff for you, and people take it for granted, right? So, more protein's always good, right? And it's not going to fuck up your kidneys. People say it fucks up your kidneys. That's based on a terrible study. That's based on bad science. I got debunked, and people are doing higher protein, and they're still doing well with their kidneys. So, yeah, keep that in mind. So, is sleep adequate? Very important, right? Sleep is where your body can heal, rest, digest, rejuvenate, restore yourself, right? The first two big phases of sleep, right? That's for helping you with energy. After that, it's for, mental health, right? Memory consolidation of taking short-term into long-term, helping you feel good, great, Without it, you don't feel rejuvenated. You don't feel healed, right? That's why sleep's really important. Poor sleep can disrupt dopamine, norepinephrine, cortisol, emotional regulation, and executive function. But to be fair, everyone is affected by bad sleep. I have an awesome article. I should put an awesome, because that's correct. I have an awesome article on how people can sleep efficiently better, like a baby, stay asleep, and wake up well rested. Especially since we live in a world full of artificial light, you're going to learn a lot of interesting, valuable information to help you with that, right? So you know what to do before bed, so you're primed for sleep, you're getting melatonin going up, and you're good to sleep and sleep like a baby, right? Now, it's chronic stress being addressed. First, a person with a fast COMT genotype should be interested in reducing the chronic physiological demand placed on catecholamine systems, right? Again, I refer to their goal sleep above to help you with that. But secondly, chronic stress from inflammation is a big deal. I recommend all newcomers how. Wait. Let's see. I recommend all newcomers who have finally decided to get healthy to refer to this video article on removing as many sources of chronic inflammation as possible, right? So before you get healthier, right, you gotta remove all stresses of inflammation, toxicity, heavy metals, things that are gonna fuck with you, right? Mold, mycotoxins, Lyme, that kind of thing, right? So you could put yourself in an environment where you can begin healing. Doesn't get you sick. People often leave that out, right? It's really important. You gotta fix that, right? Your foods, make sure they're not toxic, right? I think I have a link to it there, right? So you can begin healing, right? Because, you know, there's always that stress bucket analogy, right? People talk about if your stress bucket's full and overfilling, then you're not going to get healthier because you're overspilling. The goal is to reduce that bucket stress to nothing, so you're not overspilling water, more or less. So 8, are stimulants helping or hurting? Caffeine and other stimulants may temporarily improve alertness and motivation. I do not have an issue with 1 cup of coffee in the morning. However, if you use and abuse a lot of coffee and energy drinks and caffeine in general, then it may cause anxiety, insomnia, irritability, jitteriness, or elevated heart rate, affecting your stress level. Excess caffeine may be creating more physiological stress than benefits. Again, I've talked about this before. There's some people that just run on coffee and pastries all day. They don't have actual real food. They're not getting the protein they need. They're not getting the fat they need. They're eating a lot of carbs and fast food and shit and seed oils. And yeah, of course, they're feeling like shit. When you eat like shit, you feel like shit. When you eat good and better, you feel better and good, right? It's not that hard, like really. But you're here, you're watching this video, you go to my Patreon, you'll find all sorts of stuff here. Again, all my stuff is on YouTube, right? So I do hope you're inspired to watch my content because people love my content and it's life changing. That's why I do it, right? I want you to have an amazing, better, happier quality of life, right? And if you could have a change in your life, share this with your friends, right? You know, your best friends, right? You want them to be awesome too, right? Husband or wife, right? Your mother, your father, your brothers, sisters, your uncles, aunts, right? Your children, right? You want them to all be badass, right? Awesome, right? Happy, right? Good health. Who doesn't want that, right? There's people richer than rich and they have bad health, right? And I've never met one. And if they did, they probably make me rich, right? But I digress, right? You know, true wealth is health, right? Because there are wealthy people and they can't buy that health, right? You know, like they're just too far gone, or they're seeing all these like, you know, expert doctors or nutritionists and people that are famous on YouTube, and they're actually complete dipshits. They don't know anything, right? You know, I don't speak ill of people, right? But some people are very not humble, right? Very braggadocious, and they don't know anything, and they hurt people and saying terrible information that's not useful, right? Or at least provided in such a nuanced way where they're not going to hang themselves with rope on accident, right? Or they're not going to burn themselves or blow themselves up, right? You know? Like how I talked about folate, right? Not many people do that nuanced discussion on folate involving the form, COMT, and the motherfucker gene, and how depending on which one you have or do have, you know, which one you should take, which one you shouldn't take, how that affects you. You know, that's true, actual, real nuance. That's what being knowledgeable is, right? To be able to have a blanket statement and where it could be right and wrong depending on context, right? And given the context, right? That's what separates the best from the rest. But, you know, the best don't have the best marketers in the world, right? So you'll never know them. The best anyone is probably out there and you'll never know them, right? The best doctor is probably retired, right? The best nutritionist is probably, you know, living in his own, you know, doomsday bunker, right? You know? The best mechanic, right, is probably fixing planes, right? The best barber can never get the best haircut because he can't cut his own hair, right? You know what I mean? Like, beware of people who claim to be the best and great because the reality is, I mean, it's just bragging, right? Only people that are your clients and people that know you and they see you, that can really say that about you, right? But again, marketing's the devil, right? People with a shit ton of money can market their way into anything. Look at elections in this world and recently, right? So again, right, doesn't matter how. So I'm not Floridan, but I really like James Fishback. He was really interesting. This guy was so boots on the ground, campaigning every single day, but he lost the primary because he never fucking had ads, right? Ads are important, right? Ads are how you get the boomers to do things, right? So again, right, people got to think smart about how they do things, right? I digress too much. It's been like an hour and 35 minutes, right? It's a big topic, so don't mind me when I go off tangent because it's a little tiring, right? I don't talk this much. It's probably my longest video up to date so far. So, all right, let's get through it. Almost done. So, are you eating well enough? The main goal is to nourish your body with nutrient-dense foods while also focusing on the least toxic foods. Reduce your junk food and fast food as much as possible. If you don't know what foods to eat, then I have a pretty good list for you right here. Choose what you want. You know, I don't like giving people protocols, right? Because we're all different. We like different things. It is what it is, right? So I have this general list of foods, right? Again, always get meat as your staples. Pick the fruits you like, pick the veggies you like, pick the stuff you like, and, you know, do your own diet, right? And if it doesn't work, change it. If it doesn't work good for you, keep it, you know? Just keep it easy, keep it simple, keep it, you know, relax, chill, right? So yeah, you know, that's all you do, right? And you should improve, you should get better. You know, get your magnesium, get your meats in, get your vitamin C, you know. So the most important thing, right, I'm going to tell you, right, is to, you know, I'm not a fan of Gary Brecka, because all he does is talk about MTHFR, but it is pretty important, right? So you got to get that going, right? Which is why folate is even more important, right? Whether you need to take a methylfolate if you have these mutations, whether you need to take a calcium folinate, depending if you don't have those mutations, or if you're going to be the low COMT type, right? That way you can do what's best for your body, right? Because we're all different. And in ending, Fast COMT may be particularly relevant when depression is also characterized by, again, low motivation. You can also be a slacker due to Fast COMT, right? A low drive, you're not excited or stimulated, right? Again, right? Difficulty initiating tasks. Or you just don't see the point in doing the task, right? And you got to be convinced or be pushed to do something, right? Not because you're lazy, but you're just like, you don't care. Or you don't think, you just didn't find the meaning in something, right? Or the meaning wasn't strong enough for you to care about it, right? Poor concentration. If you don't care, then it's just noise. If you care, then it's meaningful data, right? Like I talked about earlier. When you care about something, it's data. If you don't give a shit, it's just noise you don't care about. Mental fatigue. An office job could be boring. Maybe you require a job that's more stimulating, maybe more physical, you know. That's just reality, right? People hate office work, right? But not everybody hates office work. Some people love office work. So, again, it just depends on you, right? So, low reward sensitivity. Find rewards or hopefully you'll actually want or like. Focus on what you like. Some people don't even know what they like. Ask people, you know, when they're done from work, what do you do? What's your hobbies? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, really? You don't know your hobbies? Like, you don't like golfing or doing pickleball or playing video games or... I mean, as far as I know, right, people's whole thing is Netflix, right? I like watching things. Who doesn't like watching stuff, right? I mean, you know, people need to have hobbies, right? Like some people like reading, right? Some people like to go walk in the park, right? Some people, again, right, like to go skydiving, right? People have things to do, right? Like playing guitar, right? Or maybe you're, I don't know, playing, what's that thing that sounds funny? The recorder, right? Maybe you mastered the recorder and that's like your whole thing, right? Again, we're all different, right? Maybe in your spare time you study history of very specific things, right? It just depends. Like we're all different, right? Maybe you work on your car, right? You know, maybe you got a garage and you're rebuilding a Corvette or a Mustang or something old, vintage, cool, right? You know, so sit down and write a list. What do you like? You know, some people don't have friends and they're not asked that question, right? Or people, or maybe no people that suck asking questions, right? Like I'm really amazing at asking questions, right? So start asking yourself questions, right? If you don't have anybody, because you didn't know yourself, and when you know yourself, you know what you can do to make yourself happy. Well, to give yourself that dopamine, right? And to keep that dopamine going, right? In a healthy way, you know, not like doing drugs. stress-related cognitive decline, work on what you like or you'll wither away. You know, there's that idea that the Japanese had, right, of ikigai, I think, right? Like, let's say you have a job, right? And there's three factors, right? Good pay, you're doing good things, and you like it. You can have at least two of them to work a job. If you don't have any of them, or you're one out of three, then that's not the right job for you, right? You can have the best pay, but if you hate it, you're not doing good things, then you're not going to like it. But you're doing a job, right? And sure, maybe the pay's not amazing, right? But you love it and you're doing good things. It fulfills you and you feel good about that, right? Important, right? To feel good about what you're doing, right? You know, let's say, for example, you're a hitman, right? You get paid well and you're loving your job because you're killing bad people. Okay, I guess, right? Let's say you're a hitman. You get paid good. You don't like your job and you don't like it because you're killing good people, right? Then maybe you shouldn't be a hitman, right? Just a funny. So again, depression can involve serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, glutamate, GABA, inflammation, HPA axis signaling, mitochondrial function, thyroid physiology, sleep, nutrient deficiencies, MTHFR mutations, and many other systems. I mean, like I said, right, COMT is just one of those pieces, right? Not even accounting for MTHFR, right? But I brought that up because that's just as important, right? If you have hypothyroidism, that's going to fuck with you too, right? Which is going to be related to nutrient deficiencies, right? Like selenium or iodine and zinc and B3, depending on what's up, right? Or if you're afflicted by Lyme disease and Borrelia and Bartonella and other cofactors, right? That could be a big thing screwing you, right? Again, moldy mycotoxins, right? Maybe you still live in a moldy home and you're taking extraconazole and all the zoles, right? And you're still not doing better, right? Because you didn't remediate your home and something, right? Or maybe you moved into a workplace, right? Because it happens sometimes. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say this is like the end-all be-all, but it does play a pretty big factor, right? Having a fast COMT, right? Or even a low COMT, right? Which I'll do another video on that. Hopefully it won't be as long, right? We're almost going to be an hour and 42 minutes. Amazing. Gets to talk a lot. And this is because I started later. So again, right, the objective is to create an environment where catecholamine production, signaling, and clearance remain appropriately balanced. For someone with the fast COMT valine genotype, that may mean paying particularly more attention to adequate nutrition, magnesium, protein, B12, folate, sleep, stress management, and factors that support healthy dopamine. If this article resonated with you, then you're on the right track. Or maybe it's not you, right? Think of someone else who might be like this, right? Cool, chill, chill guy, right? Or if you're the opposite of this, right, then you're more likely going to be a slow type COMT. And or you may be a normal person and you're afflicted with something that's causing you to, have that anxiety and that high alertness and kind of being strung on edge, right? But I will do an article about this more or less next week, right? Depending on my time. So yeah, I mean, I thought this was going to be like a 30-minute video, but I just keep talking, and, I don't like saying blanket statements because everything requires, nuance, right? Like everything requires context, right? If I just did this in 5 minutes with no context, you'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're crazy, man. Like, dude, like, this is like meaningless. But by the way I talk and the way I set things up and how I talk about things, it gives meaning to what this article is, right? And it's important to me to do this, right? Because I could just do an article and leave you to kind of wonder, right? But as I talk about things and I really experiences and things I know, then it kind of makes it a brighter, prettier, awesome picture, right? That's worth more than 1,000 words, right? And that's really the end, right? I mean, I talked about everything I wanted to talk about. And yeah, please go to my Patreon and look at my how to reduce inflammation. I think it's a great beginner guide. Or when you subscribe, or I do have a guide there of like things you could read that are important if you have issues with certain things, like a kind of beginner's guide on which ones to read first. I have a lot of information on my Patreon, and it's getting a little bigger, right? And I'm happy. And so yeah, please support me. Subscribe to my YouTube and follow me on the TikToks or Instagram or whatever, right? But besides doing that, you got to share my videos, right? Like, you got to tell your friends, right? Maybe you have a friend that has depression, right? Or they think they have depression, right? and really they just have a fast COMT, and their pleasure from dopamine is very short-lived, right? Or maybe they're gonna find out, yeah, maybe I'll make a list of things that make me happy and feel good, right? And then do those things and realize, yeah, I'm not depressed. I just wasn't on the path of doing things I like, right? Because there are people that are doing things that they hate, and they're like having a realization at some point in their life. They're like, why am I doing this? I fucking hate this. I don't want to be a lawyer, right? I don't want to be an engineer. I don't want to be, you name it, right? I don't want to be a Fed. And then they change their life. They do something else, and they're happier. And it could have really just been that simple, right? Or maybe you're a fast COMT, right? And God forbid, right? Hopefully you're not doing drugs, right? But if you're in that situation and you're doing drugs that are stimulating you, right? Maybe all right, I understand why I'm chasing the dragon. I got this fast COMT. I need to make some lifestyle changes, be healthier. And again, if you're trying to mess with addiction, B3 can help with that. Nicotinic acid. Beware the flush, But yeah, I think this is I mean, I've written a lot of important articles, right? Really important things. But to me, this one is like, because again, vitamin toxicity is near and dear to my heart because it's a personal thing. But I do want the world to be a happier place and a healthier place, and to be a much more knowledgeable place by knowing this information, right? Not a lot of people tug on it. It's like a thing, the end, right? But this thing has profound implications and impacts on people's health. That they knew about it, they take action to get healthier, right? And to make meaningful changes in their life, right? So just to end that, in case someone's lazy, right? Or they just don't care enough and they want the quick notes, right? Get the right folate, get your B12 by eating meat. If you eat meat, you also get the proteins you need, essential amino acids, right? Like the methionines, right? Like cysteines, like the, again, for your SAMe, right? Like the tyrosine, right? You get your iron from it, right? You get your zinc, selenium, right? Help you with your liver. You're getting other B vitamins in there, right? I'm getting some vitamin C. It's going to help you with some other stuff for like the BH4, right? And yeah, I mean, that's pretty simple. And again, read my articles about how to reduce inflammation and to be as clean as possible, right? But yeah, I'm going to end it here because I'm getting to an hour 47 minutes. I should have been done an hour ago, and I started this an hour later too, so I'm kind of running over time, right? But again, everyone, guys, women, thank you. God bless y'all. Have an amazing day. I hope this found you when you needed it. And if not, send it to someone that needs it, right? Because again, right? I believe in the whole idea that everything happens for a reason. And if you're watching this, there's probably a reason you're watching it, right? Or if it wasn't for you, maybe it was to help you understand another person, or maybe it's to help you understand that person and to send it to that person, right? So you can make a profound impact on their life. Okay, take care now. Have an amazing weekend, and yeah, stay awesome.